Good morning and welcome to the Propeller Club of Northern California. I'm Stas Margaronis, and our guest today is Greg Regan, President of the Transportation Trades Department at the AFL-CIO, and he will be speaking to us about several transportation issues. There's some news on the railway labor front. There's also been some developments on the Jones Act waiver front, unfortunately, one more time. There's also some cargo preference issues we're going to be discussing with Greg. And welcome to all of you. I am going to start by reminding you that on October 25th, Captain Taylor Lamb, Sector San Francisco Commander, will be speaking on cybersecurity. That's at 11 o'clock. Tuesday, October 25th. And on November 9th, the Propeller Club of Northern California and the Society of American Military Engineers will be producing the 6th Storms, Flooding, and Sea Level Defense Conference. That's November 9th. And Eugene Soroka, Executive Director of the Port of Los Angeles, will be the keynote speaker. He'll be talking about collaboration between the US and China on resiliency issues. And since we don't have a lot of collaboration right now, that'll be kind of a newsworthy thing to follow. There will also be speakers from the Port of Rotterdam, Port of San Francisco, Port of San Diego, Port of Los Angeles, as well as speakers from the Army Corps of Engineers in San Francisco, Baltimore, and New Orleans, a report on what's going on in Texas, and it should be very interesting on the resiliency front. So on that note, I will begin by asking everybody to introduce themselves, and I start with my good friend and comrade in arms, Todd Crawshaw. Good morning, Todd.
Good morning. Crawshaw Design, we provide integrated brand marketing for print and web, hosting and IT support.
Very good. Thank you. Greg, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Greg Regan. I'm the president of the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO, 37 Union Labor Federation based in Washington, D.C. And I apologize for the gaudy background. I'm at Bally's in Las Vegas right now. So it's, it's the decor you get.
Well, thank you very much, Greg. Robert Wilkins, good morning, sir.
Good morning. I'm Robert Wilkins. I'm the Executive Director of the International Maritime Center. We offer moral, emotional support and logistical care for seafarers on ship when they come into port.
Very good. Thank you very much, Robert. Bill Nixon, God, I haven't seen you in 24 hours.
Bill Nixon, associated with Trans-Marine Navigation Bulk Ship Tramp Agents, and also a member of the Marine Exchange Board of Directors, as is Robert Wilkins.
Very good. And next I see my good friend, Kerry Dahl. Kerry, good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Kerry Dahl, former organizing director for the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way, and currently back in the hiring hall as a casual with Local 10 ILWU.
Kerry, good to see you. Dennis Dysinger. Good morning, Dennis.
Hey, Stas. Dennis Dysinger, independent maritime and logistic consultant, and also a board of director member of the San Francisco Marine Exchange.
So we're going to be talking about shipbuilding today, Dennis. So if you've got any bright ideas, we could use them, especially if we happen to have some issues in the Far East that are going to require more than 3 sea lift ships.
You copy that.
Evie Wong, good morning.
Good morning, Stas. How's everyone? Evie Huang. I'm with Alba Wheels Up and current president of the Customs Brokers Forwarders Association of Northern California. It's a mouthful. And I always have to say this, a proud member of PCNC. Yes, Stas. Really glad to be on and hope we get some good updates. Newest announcement on the rail situation is so timely. So thank you, Stas, for having this program.
Evie, thank you very much. Now, I have to apologize. Captain Lamb could only do the 25th, so we are in a slight conflict with the TFC meeting. So we may want to confab and maybe encourage people to hear Captain Lamb's presentation and then go into the TFC meeting.
Are you in trouble again, Stas? Okay.
I'm
We'll
just
make-
trying to,
We'll make something. We'll make something work. We'll make it work.
Thank you, Evie. Okay, thank you. John Carlier, Captain, good morning.
Good morning, Stas. John Carlier, port agent with San Francisco Bar Pilots.
Thank you. And I see Captain Ann there too. Captain, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Ann McIntyre, also with the Bar Pilots.
Okay, so I have written a story about your success. Would you like to just briefly tell us how you guys have finally seen light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. I don't know if anybody else has seen the article, but we've been engaged in a multi-year effort with PMSA, WISPA, and CLIA to revise the rate setting process for pilotage rates and also address the revenue decline related to COVID and the supply chain disruptions. So we're very pleased to report that we have agreed upon a new rate setting process and that the legislature and the governor also agreed with it. So pilotage rates will be taken out of the legislature and will be conducted in an administrative court with oversight from the BOPC. So that will allow a lot more nimbleness in the process where the rates can be addressed. Again, during COVID, you're tied to the legislative cycle and you have to run a bill and all this kind of stuff. And so now rates will be settled there. We also were able to agree on some emergency funding mechanisms that will be temporarily in place in order to get us back up to a revenue level where we can support the pilotage system. We'd had a pretty significant decline of 28% in our revenues. So yeah, we're thankful to everybody for getting it done, and yeah, really happy to be working together with all our industry partners on this.
Very good. Thank you very much, Captain. Nicholas Marone. Brother Marone, good morning.
Good morning. Nicholas Maroney, Vice President for the West Coast for the Seafarers International Union. Thank you, Stas.
And you're a member
Secretary for the Propeller Club and board member for the Marine Exchange. Thank you very much.
Okay. Melvin McKay. Melvin, good morning.
Good morning. How you doing? Former president of IOW Local Change, also president of NCDC, Northern California District Council.
Very good. Thank you very much for being here, Melvin.
Very welcome, Stas.
Susan Duran. Susan, good morning.
Good morning. I'm Susan Duran with FlexiVan, chassis provider in the Oakland Bay area is what I'm responsible for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Captain Laura Covery. Captain, good morning.
Good morning. Hi, thanks for the opportunity to introduce myself. Laura Covery, former mariner, former port superintendent for BP Shipping, and former a lot of things, but currently teaching supply chain management and service management at Cal State Long Beach. And I teach at the Center for International Trade and Transportation and at UCLA Extension.
And we are talking about doing some more education to try and encourage more people into the supply chain and especially the logistics and hopefully into the maritime business.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Laura. Okay, Todd, have I got everybody?
I'm not sure. Trying to keep track here. Kevin,
Oh, Kevin, good morning. Kevin Policarpo.
Morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Policarpo, and I'm a researcher that works with Stas on reports and other such materials.
Kevin, thank you very much. Okay.
Hey, boss, is it okay if I can ask am I doing notes for this meeting?
No notes. You're just participating.
Okay.
All right.
Just want to clear that up.
Okay. Bye-bye. Okay. In 2021, Greg Regan was elected president of the Transportation Trades Department, AFL-CIO, a labor organization consisting of 36 unions that together represent workers in all areas of transportation. TDD focuses on federal legislation, regulatory matters, and policy issues that impact transportation workers. In his current position, Greg leads and oversees TDD's daily operation and serves as the organization's spokesperson and chief strategist. He collaborates with TDD's affiliated unions to fight for long-term investments in our transportation system, ensure jobs in this sector are safe and secure, and to protect and expand the rights working people have to a union voice. Under Greg's direction, TDD works with elected leaders on both sides of the aisle and focuses on substantive, policy-driven arguments to advance core agenda items. Greg, I'm really pleased to see you today. I know that you have been in Las Vegas attending a meeting with a locomotive union, and that we have had some issues with some of the unions related to the railway collective bargaining process. So welcome. We really appreciate your being with us. We appreciate your gaudy background there, but understand where it came from. And welcome to the Propeller Club of Northern California.
Thank you, Seth. It's really nice to be here. And so, yeah, I'll start off actually with the sort of the broader supply chain issues and the rail bargaining. So obviously we got right up to the cliff's edge a few weeks ago and managed to get tentative agreements for all the unions. We've had 5 ratify. We've had 1 fail. I don't expect that will be the last ratification to fail. But then, at this point, all of the cooling off periods go to either mid-November or early December. At that point, we could be right back where we were a few weeks ago, where there's a risk of a shutdown within the freight rail system. But I do want to emphasize here that while the contract itself is rather contentious, I don't think you can separate the issues behind the contract, the issues why the members are so upset from the broader supply chain challenges that we faced over the last couple of years, and that frankly haven't been solved. And that's sort of the dirty little secret. We don't have the images of 60 or 40 ships anchored offshore of LA Long Beach anymore. Although I've been told that many of them are simply just circling 60 miles out as opposed to just being anchored offshore. But we really haven't solved those fundamental issues where if or when we have another surge in demand in terms of cargo demand, where we'll end up right back where we were before with the worries about empty store shelves and rising prices. And a big part of that is the fact that the railroads have systematically undermined their own workforce. They've cut everything down to the bone. They have reduced their built-out infrastructure, including their closing rail yards, mothballing equipment, and they simply do not have the capacity to be able to serve a vital role in our broader supply chain. And I think that is something that, the issues, all of the result of all of that, the issues that people are facing, the workplace morale issues, the fact that people feel like they're being worked to the bone, all of that goes directly back to the substantial reduction in workforce levels that we've seen since 2015. Since that time, the railroads have made about $156 billion in profit. And at the same time, they laid off 45,000 employees, a third of their workforce. And when you look at investment like that, you are going to undermine your broader ability to deliver for our country. And to me, it's really sad because, railroads have about 40% of the mile tonnage of long haul transportation in this country, long haul freight. That should be completely reversed. We should not be relying on trucks that are a much bigger contributor to our greenhouse gas emissions. We should be, in my view, we should have 80% of the long haul cargo should be done on freight rail. And that's not going to happen unless the railroads start investing in themselves and investing in their workforce in a meaningful way. These issues like quality of life, the attendance policies, the sick leave policies, those would not have been on the table even 5 years ago, because 5 years ago, they didn't have the same type, the workers weren't being treated the way they are right now, or at least they hadn't gotten as bad as to the point it is right now. The railroads, frankly, put those on the table with the working conditions that they put forward for their members and with the business practices they're engaged in. So I don't totally know how this is going to play out. Certainly, as I said, I don't expect that the BMWE will be the only union to vote down their tentative agreement. Of course, with the Railway Labor Act, Congress can come in and impose a contract. And I would expect, and in fact, I know that Congress has such legislation ready to go, and they're not going to want to allow a work stoppage to go to harm the economy, particularly at a fairly delicate moment where we are right now. But so I don't think you can separate sort of what the workers are facing from the broader supply chain crisis I mentioned. But I also think that it connects pretty closely with maritime in our country and the U.S. maritime industry. We are about to have a lot of money go out the door, specifically to address supply chain issues. There's a lot of money dedicated towards greater port access for railroads or railroad access for ports. We're going to have a lot of multimodal infrastructure money go out the door, grade crossings, things like that are all going. That money is not going to go directly to the railroads, but it is going to directly benefit them by creating a greater capacity throughout the country. And where we have fallen short, frankly, and now this is where I get to the maritime side, is we have allowed our U.S. merchant marine to basically dwindle. We have essentially ceded the seas to our competitors overseas. And I think that if we learned anything, and we learned it through these various crises, whether it be the supply chain crisis where we couldn't get containers because the foreign shipping companies wanted to use them, hoard them for themselves. We did not have any capacity domestically to be able to make up that difference. It harms us from an economic and national security perspective that we do not have our own sea lift capacity to be able to support our economy. It harms us when you see natural disasters happen, where we are going to need a rapid response from our maritime industry to be able to deliver aid and supplies to people in Puerto Rico or in other places in this country, or even overseas. And the fact that we don't have it is usually used as an example about why we need to just scrap it all together. Let's get rid of the Jones Act. We need to, you end up seeing a very opportunistic approach. Every time there's a natural disaster, the longtime opponents of the Jones Act swoop in and immediately start calling for blanket waivers to the Jones Act, oftentimes, year-long waivers to address something that is actually an immediate crisis. And it is exactly that. It's opportunistic. It's meant to undermine the industry and hopefully get rid of it altogether down the road. They don't think it should exist. And I think that, one of the more uplifting aspects about certainly this administration is that right from the beginning, the president, when the president issued its Build America, Buy America executive orders to focus on how do we strengthen our own domestic industry, they put maritime right up in there. Support for the Jones Act and support for cargo preference. The administration treats cargo preference like they would domestic manufacturing, that this is a vital source of our economy and that we need to take these things seriously. We recently had a GAO report that basically said we need to do a better job of enforcing our cargo preference laws throughout all the various agencies within the federal government. And MARAD has to develop a better system of being able to enforce these laws and hold people accountable. And I don't think that really goes far enough. I think that we as a country need to develop a national maritime strategy, a national maritime plan that includes how do we grow our use of cargo preference to start expanding our U.S. flag fleet and not just hold it steady. I think we need to look at ways to increase our investment in maritime security, the Maritime Security Program. Certainly don't touch the Jones Act and get away from falling victim to sort of the spin that the Jones Act is somehow hurting people in need, when in fact we had ships ready and eager to go deliver aid, and we had the capacity to do it, certainly in Puerto Rico. And all of this can be done, but it needs to be done with a very systemic and thoughtful plan moving forward. And then, of course, that includes shipbuilding. I mean, we are entirely reliant. We don't have, the only shipbuilding we have in this country is military at this point, in terms of commercial vessels. We had the first Jones Act US built bulk carrier, bulk freighter, and for the Great Lakes was just, it was the first one in 45 years, was just christened a couple months ago. And it's like 45 years. And we're talking about major industries, whether it be salt or grain across the Great Lakes that are really integral to our trade with Canada. We should be actively trying to invest in that to make sure that we have the ability to back up to actually sustain our own economy, because as we've seen, we can't rely on our competitors to actually help us out when they themselves are trying to deliver their own goods. So I think that as we're looking at our broader challenges as a supply chain, it does need to require some reforms to our freight rail system and making sure that our common carrier obligations are actually met by these companies. But it also makes sure that we are looking at it holistically. And I think a national maritime strategy where we are aggressively expanding cargo preference, where we are investing in our domestic manufacturing and making sure that we can build the capacity to grow the fleet. Because I think a lot of our strategy so far has been one that honestly we see in places like Amtrak and public transit as well, where you starve it, you see the service go down, you see the dissatisfaction from the customers, so that they end up wanting to go, use other modes of transportation, and then the opponents of it, who just starve them of funding, turn and say, "See, nobody wants to ride this." It's like, well, of course no one wants to ride it, because you just completely gutted its funding and created a terrible service. And then you ask why we don't have the same freight or passenger rail system that they have in Europe. It's because Europe pays for it. And it's the same thing that's going to be true with our maritime industry. We need to be able to have a real policy where this is a priority for us. We're going to invest in it, and we're going to make ourselves more self-reliant and frankly competitive with the rest of the world as we're moving forward. So there is a lot of work to do, and it's not going to be easy here. And the other thing I point to, because we have a brother from the ILWU here, I get really sick and tired of the focus on the ports, and there's like an infatuation with this idea that we need to measure how quickly cargo, cars are moving in, or containers are moving in and out of the ports. When that was never the problem. There was never an issue with the ability of the ports to move the containers in and out, or off of ships and onto ships. It was about getting them off the port yards and into the country. And that was the part that was completely ignored the last time around. I've been having some very frank conversations with everybody from General Lyons to Pete Buttigieg to the White House about the fact that they need to adjust their focus, because this is going to happen again. And we need to be holding accountable the other private actors in this sector that are frankly underperforming dramatically and hurting our overall ability to be competitive. So I guess I'll sort of stop there. I threw a lot at you, but I'd be happy to hear any questions or any comments based on what I said so far.
Greg, one question right off the bat. How did they get that Jones Act waiver so quickly for that ship going to Puerto Rico? And I mean, it seemed like 1 minute everything was fine, and the next minute there was a waiver. Was there any special circumstance to that?
So I haven't heard. I mean, look, we were privately very critical of the administration. We didn't want to make a big thing of it. This is always a politically sensitive thing when it comes to Jones Act waivers during a crisis when people are in need. You don't want to be perceived as anti-Puerto Ricans and anti-people in need. So we demonstrated that there wasn't frankly told them there is no need for this waiver. They have the Secretary of Homeland Security said that there is not a diesel shortage. So it's not like that was, and it was one diesel ship. It's not like that was the issue that they were having. But, I think what happens eventually is, some ship had a bunch of diesel fuel, realized they could try to offload it someplace closer than going to where their ultimate destination was, and sees that as an opportunity. Say, oh, well, we need a Jones Act waiver for this because we have all this fuel, we want to deliver it. And, it'd be one thing if they were going to donate that fuel to the people in need, but of course that's not, they were selling it to the government. So to me, it was it reeked of just sort of cynicism. I do appreciate that it was a very targeted waiver. It was specific to one ship that did not go any farther than that. Because what we were seeing from a lot of the members of Congress who are usually anti-Jones Act, they were coming out with this 1-year blanket waiver on all Jones Act ships to Puerto Rico, and thankfully the administration was not seduced by that argument.
Okay, very good. Nicholas Marone, would you like to comment at this point about the Jones Act situation? Nick, are you there?
Okay. I think Greg really summed it up quite accurately. We're always going to have these challenges moving forward. There's always going to be people behind the scene that are going to try and take advantage of our shortfalls as they come around. I think the greater picture is for the security of the long term is just what Greg mentioned, and that is a national plan to address the domestic transportation sector and the security that it provides for our citizens and our homeland security. And there's a lot of revenues that come out of this type of work that the government also enjoys. It's befuddling me to understand how they just don't see it that way. But special interests play a role in our government. They're going to be there forever and ever. And we just have to stay on top of these type of issues and continue our educational process amongst our elected leaders so that they feel and can sense the benefits for all constituents of the United States.
What's always interesting to me on this subject of what the benefits are, the labor movement doesn't always look to the U.S. military as one of our strongest allies, but when it comes to U.S. sea lift capacity, they have always been the strongest arguments. For like the Maritime Security Program is a great example. We got the authorized spending level up significantly a few years ago for MSP, and the government, the U.S. military always sends letters to Congress supporting this. They say, look, it would take, I can't remember the exact number, but it's something like $30 billion to replicate the sea lift capacity that they get for $60 million a year. And it's just the cost savings to the U.S. government by supporting a fleet that is capable of delivering military supplies in a time of need is invaluable. It's massive savings. And yet people they don't see those savings. They just look at, whatever the cost is of, the slightly higher cost of delivering food through the food aid program. And then they say, well, it's a waste of money. And I think we have to look at these all holistically in terms of what value it brings to our government as a whole, as opposed to just cherry picking individual areas where, it costs a little bit more here. And that's where people fall into the trap.
Very good.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct there. That's always been the situation. And the food aid is a little bit different than the Maritime Security Program. That's government cargo giveaways. I don't see why they don't understand that products made in America, meant to be given away by America, should be carried on American ships. The whole idea of that program was that all those bagged cargoes would have the U.S. flag stamped on it, and all these people in these foreign countries receiving this would recognize that U.S. flag as being a salvation for them.
Yep.
So when we had to show up or do business in these countries under the U.S. flag, we would be very welcomed in. And to taxpayer dollars to purchase commodity cargoes from overseas just to save a few dollars. It's just so demeaning to the benefit of what was intended with the program.
Yeah, you're right. And I didn't mean to conflate the two programs. I know they're different, but I do think, obviously there's never going to be enough government cargo through MSP, same way there's never going to be enough through necessarily through cargo preference unless we up it to entice people to actually flag their vessels under the US, and then also make sure that they participate in MSP. So all of these work together in order to make sure that we do maintain the very modest fleet we currently have. You take away any one of these programs and it starts to undermine the business model that allows us to have the US Merchant Marine that we do.
Greg, I want to intercede here in just a second. One of the issues that continues to show up in a lot of our issues and showed up in the issue of sexual assaults against mariners, student mariners from some of the academies, is the role of the Maritime Administration, which you yourself also cited in the cargo preference issue. Does the Maritime Administration need to have a stronger role in the transportation system? Do we need to do something here to make things better? Because there was a whole supply chain crisis that went on for nearly 2 years, and MARAD was hardly evident to the public at all.
Yeah, I do think that, we should look at the next MARAD reauthorization and figure out how to give them a stronger role in the economic side of this. The sexual assault issue is, I think, unfortunately, it's a cultural issue that is going to need to be dramatically changed. And it's not the only industry or organization that has dealt with a crisis like this, where you have, Peace Corps was famously an example of this, where there was a lot of sexual assaults for people that were overseas in Peace Corps, and they took a systemic approach to it to address it. And it is no longer a major problem. The US military is another great example of this. So I do think that starting in the academies and making sure that we're addressing cultural issues to make sure that every single person feels welcome and safe, regardless of their sex or creed or whatever, race, sex, creed, they need to make sure that this is a welcoming industry, because we need to, if we're going to actually rebuild our maritime system, we need a lot more mariners too. And we need to be able to draw from a pool of people who are interested, who may not just be your typical white guys. Like, there is going to have to be a need to recruit a diverse workforce to actually fill the US maritime system. And I talked to plenty of mariners who were like, man, like, this one woman was the best, she was the best engineer, outperformed every single guy on the ship. And it's the second I heard someone say something derogatory towards her, I shut that down right away. And those are the types of cultural changes where you need strong leaders. And oftentimes it's officers, sometimes it's the instructors of the academy that will change this culture and hopefully address it so that we never have to read another awful story like that again.
I want to ask Captain Ann McIntyre, who is a graduate of the California Maritime Academy. We've had some discussions on during Maritime Day in May about this issue. What do you think needs to happen at the academies, and to make sure that these problems go away and we just read a couple of days ago, I'm sure we all saw it, a captain drugged and raped 2 Kings Point cadets, female cadets. What needs to change here?
I don't, even know where to start, with that one. I mean, I think, my association is, mostly with Cal Maritime. And I know that they are, making big efforts to educate and, with, faculty, with staff, with students, and to create, safe environments for everybody. And but the environment like still exists in some cases, and a lot of times it's perpetuated through social media. You've got young people that are together in close quarters, and yeah, I think it's gonna take a big overhaul of a lot of stuff. You know, and you know, I'd like to say that, you know, education will change things. But you know, it's not just like educating and training. It's like people have to really embrace embrace it to the point where it you know, it becomes normalized, and it's not normalized right now. We still have to talk about it, and I don't know what it's going to take to get there.
One thing that happened in the Obama, when there was one of these assaults happened in the Obama administration, and their response was to simply shut down the C-year program for 2 years. And that actually made the problem worse, because so many cadets look forward to that C-year. It's such a valuable experience for them. And then they shut it down because a woman reported a rape. And then it made everybody hostile towards, you know, the women who were there. And it just made it did nothing to address the underlying problems. It just basically swept it under the carpet for a couple of years and hoped it went away.
Right. I agree to that. And I also think that informally, a lot of, you know, I'm not saying the, you know, super, you know, like egregious behavior, but the kind of behavior that allows egregious things to happen is still informally tolerated.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Captain Ann. I want to switch over to a question about shipbuilding, and Dennis. You heard the discussion that we're primarily focused on military shipbuilding and not commercial shipbuilding. And yet there was a time when things were different. Is there a way that we can get back into the commercial shipbuilding game in support of the Jones Act and in support of the kind of bulk cargoes that Greg's talking about on the Great Lakes? Not to mention the fact that we've had problems with our exporters not being able to get on foreign flag ships last year. Dennis?
Well, thanks, Stas. Just to jump in, Matson and Pasha have built new ships in the U.S. recently within the last 2 years, including the one you mentioned, Greg, on the Great Lakes. So there is a little bit of commercial shipbuilding going on. I'm finding a lot of it is moving towards tugs and barges, specifically ATBs, articulating tugs and barges. They seem to be proliferating, if I get that right, up and down the coast here on the West Coast and then the East Coast as well. You know what to do. A lot of actually our domestic shipbuilding capacity, shipbuilding, is actually controlled by foreign entities. Austal, building the ships in Mobile. I forget the Keppel down in Texas, and Acker in Philadelphia. So, you know, we're allowing some of the foreign entities to come in and build the ships. And a lot of the ships that we are building are Legos that come from Korea, such that we import the pieces. So I don't know what we can do. There's been, MARAD has tried to do these maritime highway projects. None of them I've seen have worked up and down the Mississippi, here in San Francisco, on the East Coast. So yeah, I don't have an answer for you, Stas.
Okay.
One thing I've wondered, I know that there have been some mariner unions have entertained the idea of having a short-term, you know, you have a one-time grandfather in of foreign-made vessels to put them to put them under the U.S. flag and make them Jones Act compliant, with the idea that if you are expanding the capacity of our fleet, it'll at least create more demand and then spur more demand to build vessels here. Is that something that you see as a possibility?
I haven't heard that at all. I know obviously with the Jones Act, everybody fights the reflagging of a foreign ship. And most of that reflagging happens with military assets.
Right.
That kind of come in under either MARAD or MSC.
Well, one of the things where this has come up is with this idea of short sea shipping and a national marine highway, where if we are able to have a short-term capacity that shows that you can alleviate some of the congestion at, for instance, LA Long Beach by having some of the container get offloaded there, then put more on a U.S. vessel that can go up to, Seattle or Tacoma or even just
Oakland. Let's not forget us.
Yeah, or Oakland. And then you create that, it shows that there is a viable option there to reduce congestion and actually effectively move goods. And frankly, it would hopefully create greater demand for those other ports beyond LA Long Beach. And in that regard, they could have a short-term sort of waiver of ships that can be the proving point, and then also have people who then see that there is a market for investing in shipbuilding here, that knowing that like in 4 years, those ships will no longer be allowed to carry that cargo, something like that.
Well, just one point, we've had a huge expansion of trucking between Northern California and Southern California as a result of the supply chain. And that has created a lot of congestion on highways. And it was partly due to what happened in the last 2 years. Here at the Port of Oakland, we lost a number of sailings. The Port of Seattle has lost sailings, and there's hardly any sailings going out of Portland. The result is that we're having to truck a lot more stuff. And as you just pointed out, that stuff could go on, those containers could go on ships. The ships tend to be quite competitive because if you carry 500 or 600 containers on one platform, you're going to be more efficient than you're doing it, just by truck. And we actually even do better than the railroads because we can carry a lot more than a train can. I just don't think that we've really given this a fair shot. And I think we need to be looking at ships and a partnership perhaps with the ports on both the West Coast and the East Coast, where there's a lot of congestion and where we could do a lot of good. And the last thing I'll point out is that there's going to be a big push, as you all know, about reducing carbon emissions. And Maersk has invested very heavily in methanol-powered ships, going beyond LNG to methanol, which reduces carbon emissions by 95%. So there are some opportunities there, and that might also dovetail with these other issues we've been talking about with cargo preference, the food program, where maybe we ought to be thinking about how to do things a little differently.
Yep, I completely agree. And I think that there's, and there is, by the way, there is constant talk about this in Washington. Jimmy Hart, who's the president of the Metal Trades Department of the AFL-CIO, has been laser focused on this. Unfortunately, he's been sort of, there is this one sort of old money millionaire who wants to try to create a shipbuilding operation, and his name is escaping me. And I don't really understand what their policy objective is. I don't understand what this guy is asking for, when in reality, I kind of want him to just, I'm sick of him saying like, well, if they do these things, then I'll build ships. I'm like, why don't you build ships? You build a ship. And so it's a little perplexing to me, but I do think that there's the double taxation issue has always been one that we pointed to, that, if your goods get taxed twice because you offload them in one port to another ship, and then you pay the harbor maintenance tax, and then you do it again when you go to, Oakland. But there are a few minor policy ideas, but ultimately I just think we need to have someone who actually believes it can work and invest in it.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for this, Greg. I think we need to switch over to the rail situation. And I see my friend Carrie over there looking back and forth. Carrie, do you want to chime in here about some of the issues that you're concerned about with the rail contracts?
For those of you who don't know me, I spent 8 years as the organizing director of the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way. So they were in the news last night as having the membership turned down on a vote of about 56 to 44%, the tentative agreement that was built up off the back of the Presidential Emergency Board recommendations. And I've got a lot of contacts around the country, all 48 states, all Class 1 railroads. And I think that some of the main themes that we're hearing from the workforce, similar to what Greg had to say, has a lot to do with respect on the job. The job has become something that people are trying to flee whenever they get the opportunity. Here in Northern California, we've seen Pacific Gas and Electric basically, take away the maintenance away staff and employ them at much higher levels of pay, much better benefits, and being able to sleep in their beds at night. So, respect is definitely a problem. The quality of the job is a problem, but also a huge issue that's also related has to do with, being able to take a sick day here and there, or having medical benefits for you and your family that don't bankrupt you if somebody gets really sick. And so these are some of the themes that we're hearing from folks, not so much about the pay, although this membership across all 12 of the different crafts is very much separated by where they live. So folks that are living in Appalachia are having one series of responses to the economics provided by the Presidential Emergency Board, whereas folks, as you can imagine, in California are having a very different kind of response. The 24% pay increase just does not cut it if you're struggling to raise a family here in California. The wages across all of the sectors on the railroad are far too low for places like California, Denver, Chicago, and the Northeast corridor. So those are some of the concerns I've heard. I was not at all surprised to see Maintenance Away vote no. I'm unaware of a fifth union, Greg, that is ratified. Is that the machinists? I know that they reached a new tentative agreement.
Well,
but
there's TCU and the Carmen. The Carmen technically was a separate ratification. So TCU, Carmen, train dispatchers, TWU is also under the.
Oh, okay.
It's a joint representation agreement with the Carmen, so they're technically, we say 13 just to make sure TWU doesn't feel left out. So that's the
fifth. Okay, yeah, good catch. Yeah, so the other one would be the IBEW. They ratified, surprisingly. Yeah, my sense is that, and Greg is with the locomotive engineers right now. I mean, in Vegas, I'm sure he's got a very microscopic sense of what the vibe is there. But from the contacts that we've got across those two locomotive unions, it's not looking good for ratification. And just in terms of my experience as an organizer coming out of the ILWU and being involved with SEIU and railroad unions, is that when you're going to ratify an agreement, whoever gets out of the gates first, yes or no, generally wins. And what's happened here is the no vote came out very early and was not pushed back on after the PEB findings came down for the better part of 2 weeks. And so I would be very surprised at this moment if either Dennis Pierce is president of the BLET or Jeremy Ferguson is the president of Smart Transportation, the old United Transportation Union, UTU, Conductors Union. If either one of those brothers are able to pull a rabbit out of the hat with their membership. That being said, I think the Biden administration came through. They definitely appointed very fair arbiters to the Presidential Emergency Board. And I feel like that group did a fairly good job if you read their 100+ page document explaining themselves. The one massive failure of the PEB was not understanding the threat to American public health of having 100, whatever we're going to call it this week, but it's really about 110,000 freight railroaders running around the country and not having sick days.
Yep.
The threat here, and we saw this in Maintenance Away, was that during COVID, folks had been trained to go to work sick over the decades, and they dragged COVID-19 into the workplace. But to get to the workplace, it's really crucial that folks understand they have to travel great distances and go through gas stations, restaurants, hotels, etc., exposing workers and the public to their virus. And so in the discussion of the PEB, I found it cringeworthy that there was no reflection on COVID-19 or coming avian flu style pandemics. So that is a really huge point of frustration to people.
Yeah.
And I'll just leave it with this. My family comes from Germany. I come from a long line of railroaders in southern Germany. And last year, the locomotive engineers in Germany shut down over 3% wage increases over a 3-year deal, which sounds very small to us now, and I'm sure they wish they could get that back. But in the moment of their doing that, we learned a little bit about the employment in Germany on their railroads, which is one railroad. It's Deutsche Bahn, which happens to be the largest revenue grossing railroad in the world. There are 37,000 locomotive engineers in Germany. There are in the neighborhood on a good day of about 26,000 freight locomotive engineers in this country. Germany is the size of Wisconsin. So yes, they have a passenger rail system, which is second to none, but we have a real crisis in this country if we think, with Amtrak, 140 or 150,000 people are going to take care of the railroading needs of the American public.
Okay, Karen, thank you. Go ahead, Greg.
To your point, yeah, by the way, I agree with everything you said. I've heard all the same things. I've been to rallies in Toledo and Galesburg, Illinois, and Lincoln, Nebraska, and I've been with all the rank and file workers out there. And I, your sense of the room is spot on. I agree with you that the sick leave thing in the PEB, the way that was handled was very poor. And ultimately, if there were a recommendation of even 3 paid sick days, I think they would have all ratified probably already, to be honest with you. The issue that you mentioned here as well about people going to work sick. I mean, sick leave was negotiated and not really a contentious negotiation, because when there were substantial overboards at the railroads, and overboards, for people to understand, they're basically like, crew on reserve. You have a amount of pay, this is a lowered amount of pay to be on call for if somebody calls in sick or if they have an emergency. They have basically been decimated across the board for all the crafts. So you really have and in one of the ways that the railroads have tried to protect themselves against people calling in sick is they make it extremely punitive to take time off. In some cases, they have what are called high impact days. And if you have a point-based attendance policy, so you got a bank of 30 days and time off takes a certain amount of days off. And if you plan ahead, it might just be 1 point. But if you have an emergency and you have to take off, you can go to the doctor, but you are going to get banked points from that. And the high impact days, those penalties are extremely punitive. So when you can get like 15, half your points lost because you missed a high impact day. And the thing that I find so messed up about this is the most craven thing to me, is that the high impact days, they're not days when there's more freight to move. They're days like Mother's Day, Father's Day, Super Bowl Sunday, Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve. It is the days that people want to be with their families. So if there were people saying, well, they didn't approve my leave time for Mother's Day, and it's my wife's first Mother's Day as a mom, but I want to be there for it, so I called in sick, and then you get banked 15 points. Next thing you know, you're suspended for 2 weeks without pay. And so that's the type of policy that's made it so you're incentivizing people to go to work sick, but also make it feel like they have zero control over their own lives. And we've seen morale just drop just incredibly. And during the pandemic, the railroads furloughed a bunch of people because at the outset, there was a drop in demand. But I think it was foolish to furlough people, because we sort of knew that people are going to be getting all their goods through shipping at this point. They're not going to be going to the stores as much. And sure enough, the demand skyrocketed after that. And so when they went to recall people who had been furloughed, they got something like 15% of people came back, whereas they were used to furloughing people and getting 90% of people to come back. And the railroad CEOs will tell you, well, we had no idea. Like, how could we have expected that this few people would come back? It's like, well, because you've been treating them like shit. Pardon my language. And so there is a fundamental rot in the freight rail industry right now that is completely dictated by the business practices that are geared entirely towards short-term profits and not long-term sustainable growth. And you're seeing people that used to view this as a career, multi-generational job, where you got, I know a lot of railroaders who are third, fourth generation railroaders. And there was a lot of pride in that job. They knew it was a hard job, but there was pride in it. They knew they were going to be fairly compensated and they were going to have a secure retirement at the end of their career. And now people are walking away from that. I mean, they have a federally guaranteed retirement system and people are walking away from all of that because it's just it's just such an awful place to work right now. And we're not going to solve this broader problem unless we have a serious reconsideration from management about how they want to treat their employees.
Thank you very much, Greg. Carrie, thank you very much for your comments here. We are getting close to the end of our time, and I think if are there any other excuse me, are there any other questions anybody wants to ask Greg? Going once, twice. Okay. Greg, I want to thank you very much for being available for us during this hour. This last part about the railroad situation, I think, is very germane. And for those of us in the supply chain business and the transportation business who are relying on railroad transportation in the immediate and hopefully in the future, the situation that you and Carrie have described is one that we do need to get resolved. And I'm not a railroad person, I'm not an expert, but losing 45,000 people and only getting 15% of them to come back doesn't sound very good to me. So we are hopeful that there will somehow be a resolution, but it's starting to look like there's going to be more rejections of the contract, right? Is that correct?
I would expect at least a couple more that will reject it. Depends on who you talk to. Some are more optimistic, some are less so in terms of the presence, the leadership, and it really did. I think honestly the more optimistic ones are the ones that have really strong local leaders that are active and engaging their membership and educating them about what is in there and what is not in there. And I think one of the key points that we're trying to make, and I made this in my speech earlier today at the BLET, is there is no collective bargaining agreement that is going to resolve these fundamental problems within the industry. There are a lot of things we can do to improve their lives. Sick leave was a big oversight that should have been in there. The wages and benefits is the highest pay increase in 45 years. So there was a lot of stuff in there traditionally just through the wages and benefits that are pretty good. So we have to, but we're not going to be able to solve sort of the business practice aspects of some of the railroads through a collective bargaining agreement, certainly not wholesale. So we're going to look at a lot of other ways down the road through the regulatory regime, through, I have this, and please don't report on this, Stas, but an idea about, there was an Obama executive order that required contractors, all government contractors, to have a certain number of paid sick days. Well, the railroads just admitted in federal court that they are federal contractors. That's why they were subject to vaccine mandates. So there is a way we can address this, right there. Amend the executive order, rope the railroads in. So those are the things we're going to try to do to remain aggressive on this and keep this. The last thing I want to have happen is when this contract is eventually resolved, and it will be, one way or the other, it will be, is to go back to having people sort of forget that railroads exist and how important they are to the fabric of our country. And by having some really strategic long-term campaigns to highlight the problems in the industry and hopefully get some changes to it, I think we can keep this front of mind and actually hopefully get some real reforms here.
Very good. Greg, Regan, thank you very much. We really appreciate, again, as I said, you're coming out of your convention in Las Vegas to be with us. Hopefully there is a resolution and hopefully there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, we'll keep working at it.
Okay. On that note, I want to just remind you all, October 25th, we have Captain Taylor Lamb on cybersecurity, and it's going to be a very interesting presentation on the challenges of cybersecurity on ships and on land, and the challenges for the ports, for the maritime industry, the steps that the Coast Guard is taking. November 9th is our Storms, Flooding, and Sea Level Defense Conference. On behalf of the Propeller Club of Northern California, our guest, Greg Regan, and our guests, thank you all very much for attending. Hope to see you in a couple of weeks. and be safe. And as I have said before, during this crisis on the supply chain, from the railroads to the trucking industry, to our longshoremen, to our mariners, our freight forwarders, and all of the other supporters, thank you for your service and thank you for the good work that you have done. And we will see you in 2 weeks.